The interesting part of this, to me, is where it says the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And this is interesting to me because this ties into both the Hindu and the Aztec. The Aztec with the legend of the fifth sun, who say the sun has disappeared 4 times and then been reborn. Okay, so in Revelation, you have saying that this impact caused an opening that produced a lot of smoke, and then the Aztecs saying that the sun would go away. I actually believe that this volcanic activity recurred 4 times.
The Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Codega and sharing one of yours.
Welcome back, my fellow seekers of the strange, the sacred, and the suspicious. You've tuned in to Codega's Codex of Curiosities, where history isn't just written by the victors, it's whispered by the survivors, sung by the stars, and sometimes screamed from the bottomless pit. Today, we're diving headfirst into a forgotten current, one that runs beneath the myth and legend and the so-called settled science. My guest, Scott Randal, is here to take us on a journey through ancient records, from the measured philosophies of Plato's Timaeus to the cryptic visions of Enoch to the cosmic cycles of the Hindu Puranas. And maybe, just maybe, shake loose some truths the modern world has been a little too eager to bury under the ice. So tonight, we're not just revisiting myths, we're revisiting memories, maybe even prophecies. All right, everyone. So if you're enjoying the show, maybe it's time to enjoy the merch. Check out my freaking awesome merch store, Codega's Bodega. Link is in the bio. Yeah, I said it, Codega's Bodega. All right, buckle up, Codex keepers. Let's bring on Scott Randal. Scott, welcome to Codega's Codex of Curiosities.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we connected on Reddit. You reached out and you had some pretty interesting theories, and I was like, I'm hooked. I want to hear this. So, Scott, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers just a little bit about yourself and where they can find you?
I'm 52 years old, and I've been studying this for about 5 years straight. I have probably close to 4,000 hours in the last 5 years poured into study of magnetic bathymetry data and topographic, and of course the legendary side of ancient history.
Wow. that is a lot of time. 5 years is 5 months would be a bit of time, but you put in 5 years. So what brought you to this? Why did you go this route? What drew you in?
To be perfectly honest, it was COVID and there wasn't a whole lot going on in life. And so I was on a YouTube bender and came across the recap structure and dove into that for a little bit. I had to part ways with that theory, but I was examining bathymetry data around the Azores Plateau, and I spotted a geological formation that just did not sit well with me, and I had to investigate it, and that one little formation has sparked the last 5 years of research.
Okay, so if you had to sum up this research into like a title, if we're going to call it this title of this show, what would you call it?
The Cataclysms.
Awesome. I love it. Let's go into it then. Why don't you take us on a trip into the Cataclysms?
Well, yeah, you kind of stole my intro there, because that's exactly what we need to talk about. Is we need to talk about how I think we've ignored too much of what's been handed down to us. And
Always.
one of the main reasons that I stand behind that statement is I've come across several mentions of an axis deviation that apparently happened at some point in ancient history. Plato's Timaeus says that. He says, now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens above the earth. The Book of Enoch, which you mentioned earlier, also makes a direct statement to that and says Noah saw that the earth had become inclined and that destruction approached. But the most interesting to me is the Hindu Puranas that says sage Agastya was sent by Lord Shiva to correct the balance of the earth as it tilted down in the south. Now, if we say that came from the perspective of India, and you take India and you drag it down to the south on a globe, what that does is it brings Greenland's north coast almost flush with the North Pole. That event would produce the exact same ice core readings that we took from Greenland, because except for there was no ice age. It was not an ice age. It was a case of a landmass due to a deviation shifting to a polar region.
Like
So
a
you
whole
still,
landmass moved to the polar region is what you're saying.
yeah. And another piece of evidence that supports that is the ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland do not match up. When Greenland supposedly got a lot colder, Antarctica was getting warmer. Now, this is exactly what we would expect from a deviation, because if you have Greenland moving up and Antarctica's on the bottom, so the only place it can go is into a tropical zone. So a deviation absolutely explains that difference in the Antarctic and the Greenland core samples. And
Okay,
that to
so
me is,
this whole shift just happens, and is it a rapid shift? This whole inclination, is it a rapid inclination?
I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is we're going to tie this into the Yuga cycles. Um, we're going to tie this into a lot of legends, the Aztec as well.
Awesome.
There's two ways that, by the sciences that we fully know today, that the Earth could deviate, and that is either from a severe gravitational pull or from a weight imbalance. And we know that weight can affect the rotation of the Earth. Back in 2000, I believe it was, NASA and a group of scientists had tried to figure out why the Earth deviated slightly, and they deemed that it was due to a very, very low water table in India. So a weight differential can make a difference in the rotational axis of the Earth. And I personally believe that it was magma, a bad case of magma displacement from an impact.
Okay. So the magma itself shifted. So the magma itself shifted and caused the whole
I
planet
believe
to tilt, more or less, is what you're saying.
I believe that an impact happened and magma came pouring out from that wound, and it was a large wound, especially according to Enoch, who actually talks about this place. He says, where I beheld the operation of a great blazing and glittering, in the midst of which there was a division. Columns of fire struggled together to the end of the abyss, and deep was their descent. But neither its measurement nor magnitude was I able to discover, neither could I perceive its origin. So he's talking about a very, very, very large lake of lava. And very large. I mean, if you can't even see the other side of it, that's pretty big. Anyway, I feel that there was enough magma that came to the surface that it caused the deviation. And unfortunately, it got a lot worse than that. But I would like to finish on the legend side of things first.
Please, please. Yes.
Where are we? I also believe that Enoch was actually describing hell there, the actual location of hell. And I say that because the next passage says, Uriel, one of the holy angels who was with me, answered and said, Enoch, why art thou alarmed and amazed at this terrific place, at this sight of suffering? So he's talking about hell right there, in my personal opinion, obviously.
But it makes sense though too, the fiery lakes of hell and everything, they talk about that. And so that's interesting. Yes.
And I actually, I've come to the conclusion over the last probably 6 months that Revelation is an actual account of the cataclysms. I do not believe that is a vision. Partly because I also believe it describes the creation of hell.
So just a quick question. So you believe Revelation has already happened?
Yes, absolutely. I believe it is our most glowing account of the cataclysms and what happened.
Okay. I like that. I like that you're challenging the narrative. Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I tend to do that a lot.
Then
I believe,
hate to interrupt, but then you're going to fit in well here. We're all about challenging the narrative that's been laid down. It's like, let's take a different look at things.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we need to do. I think we need to start deep diving back into a lot of things that we've turned away as myth and legend and really start studying them again. I think we're going to find I've already found a lot of things, and I think we're going to find a lot more. So Revelation and its creation of hell. Revelation 9:1 says, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit." Revelation 9:2 says, "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." I believe that this is a literal description of the creation of hell. I believe an impact happened, opened that up, and that's what they deemed as hell.
That's I like that theory. I really do. Because and perhaps that impact happened in a location where there was a lot of people, and this is a place of suffering, as that would then be a place of suffering too.
Yes. The interesting part of this, to me, is where it says the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And this is interesting to me because this ties into both the Hindu and the Aztec. The Aztec with the legend of the fifth sun, who say the sun has disappeared 4 times and then been reborn. Okay, so in Revelation, you have saying that this impact caused an opening that produced a lot of smoke, and then the Aztecs saying that the sun would go away. I actually believe that this volcanic activity recurred 4 times, and we'll
Okay,
get to that in
so
just a
this
moment.
type of
But
event. So you're saying like this event has happened 4 times?
I do believe that. And if you think back to the Enoch quote about Noah, he says Noah saw that the earth became inclined and that destruction approached. How would he know that the declination or the inclination of the earth would spell destruction? Unless maybe it had been handed down to him as prior knowledge.
True. Yes, that makes great sense, because it would either be he was given this information by possibly an angel, or it's been experienced before, and like you said, it's been passed down, which is very common. Pass stories down through the storytellers.
Yeah. And Plato actually, in Timaeus, where he is talking about Pathan, he says, now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens above the earth, and a great conflagration upon the earth that recurs after long intervals. That, again, to me, sounds like a description of a repeating volcanic event.
It definitely does. It definitely does.
Now, where we have the Holy Bible says that the sun was darkened, we have the Aztec legend of the fifth sun. Another indicator of that is the Hindu Yuga cycles. The Hindu Yuga cycles are each composed of three different sections. There is proper in the middle, which is a time of peace. The interesting thing is the two sections before and after are dawn and dusk. So you have another reference that could be to the sun disappearing and coming back again, which is exactly what the Aztecs say happened.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, exactly. The sun disappearing and coming back again.
I I've also heard, and maybe you can help me out with this. Sadly, there's several versions of every legend out there, so knowing which
True.
one
True. True.
actually hits the mark is very hard sometimes. Um, have you heard of a version, excuse me, of the Legend of the Fifth Sun, where the sun was in a different location when it came back?
I have heard of the sun being in a different location. Where I heard that from,
Okay,
like I said, my memory is like Swiss cheese, but I have heard that the sun like moved. Yes.
I'd heard the same thing. I just wanted to make sure. Like I said, there's so many versions out there of every myth and legend that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's kind of all this things get convoluted. They get, when they're passed down, or they just get changed to fit other people's stories. Yeah, I'm just trying to think here. Um so what is that? It was through the Aztecs, right? It said it didn't just light up the sky the same way as before. It rose from a different place. It shifted, changed positions.
Okay, that actually ties in with something I'd heard, that was actually why the death ritual was started, was to keep the sun moving east to west across the sky. There would be an actual, and I have another interesting little theory. This is a little tidbit. I
Yeah,
have
yeah. Let's hear it.
pondered so many hours of the death whistle. I actually believe mimics the wind that has been described in many other myths. The shrieking wind, and the interesting thing is the temple of the wind god is where that was first located.
And it does have a sound of a like you said, like a shrieking wind almost. It also sounds like people screaming for their lives, which could be a little bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, like I said, that was one of those little things that just kind of sticks in the back of my mind and jumps up every once in a while and makes me think about it.
I I agree. I agree. It's kind of one of those other points, which it could be valid, if especially if it was found in the temple of the wind god as well. Like that, it could be.
Yeah, I just actually learned that. I'd had that theory for a while after I'd heard it for the first time, and I think it was this last weekend I had learned that it was actually found in the temple of the wind god.
So you had this theory, and then you discover it was found there, and you're like, hmm. Isn't that peculiar?
That's
That is
literally
awesome.
been the last 5 years for me. That's why I'm still going at this.
Interesting. All right, let's continue. Let's continue.
Um, four, that this had happened 4 times. The Aztec have the legend of the fifth sun, that the sun has gone away 4 times. You have the Mayan, who have the fourth creation myth. You have the Hindu, who have four Yuga cycles, and you have Plato mentioning 4 extraordinary inundations. So that is 4 accounts from ancient history of 4 events. And I think that's kind of part of our problem, is I think we've got, if it was a reoccurring event, they all would have been rather similar. So I think we've got little pieces from 4 different events, and we're not sure which event they're from. We're not sure which one was the start, which one was the end.
But what's interesting though is that you have 4 distinct different cultures. Well, you have the Aztec, Mayan, the Hindu, and you have like the Greeks, the ancient Greeks with Plato, and they're all coming together talking about the exact same thing. Like the Aztec and Mayans were close to each other, to one another, but the
Yeah.
Hindus were extremely far away. And then you have
Yeah.
Greece as well. You have all these cultures saying the same thing, which is we can't discredit that at all. So there's a reason why they're saying, that the sun went away 4 times.
Yeah. And I've kind of gotten stuck at that point. I'd love to be able to find more examples of that to solidify that it was a reoccurring event. I think 4 is a good number when we're
I
talking
I
about
I
what's left us from ancient history.
I oh, I do as well. I believe 4 is a great. It's if we could get rid of the Aztecs or the Mayans because they're both similar locations. Um,
Correct.
but so even if you had 3, it would still be credible. But we have 4. We have 4 distinct cultures who are talking about this now. What is the consequences of this? The consequences of this shift? What can you explain that a little bit? Go into that a little bit more.
If it was weight induced, very, very bad things would happen based on the physics that we currently understand of a rotating sphere. What I believe happened is the weight began to drag towards the South Pole. Now, the closer that gets, Earth's moment of inertia would decrease and its rotational speed would increase, much like a figure skater. When they draw their weight closer to the rotational axis, their spin increases because their moment of inertia decreases. As that weight got closer and closer to the South Pole and the rotational axis, it would become more and more unstable. A wobble would develop, and the Earth, I believe, actually flipped right over. And that's a lot of the reason why I asked about your mention of the Earth spinning backwards, is that would be just one
That
more indicator.
one more indicator. I know you were asking about that, and I cannot remember who I heard that from. I'm trying to remember who I did, but someone had mentioned that the Earth spun backwards, and it wasn't for like many days. It wasn't for like a long period of time. It was only like a shorter period of time, and then it returned back to its regular spin.
Well, and that would, I mean, if it was a weight induced deviation, then the only way for the Earth to regain a stable rotation is to move the mass, somehow redistribute weight. Otherwise, it would just keep happening and keep happening and keep happening.
Okay, and would this be something called like a well, this is what people would call then a pole shift, correct?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, what we would, or what I would title this. most of the pole shift theories that I've heard is the Earth, the crust sliding over the core kind of pole shift. And I think this is the whole thing just spun over.
Okay. I'm looking into this right now to see who spoke about the Earth spinning backwards, and there is a handful of people. I'm not saying where I heard it from, but so Plato even spoke of this, a reversal of the rising and setting of the sun during periods. He writes about a reversal of the rising and setting of the sun during periods of cosmic catastrophe. He describes the world being shaken like a garment with the sun changing direction, which he ties to the natural order breaking down during the upheavals. So Plato talks about it. Herodotus, there we go. Written in the Father of History is he said that an Egyptian priest told him that the sun had risen in the west and set in the east 4 times in Egypt's distant past. So there's that. And the Mesoamerican mythology, which is the Aztecs and the Mayans, they also talk about the fifth sun in the Mayan Popol Vuh stories, where they talk where the sky behaved incorrectly, which just might be like the wobble that we're talking about, where it didn't, the sun didn't line up, though. It's not saying it went backwards. It just says stars moved strangely and the sun disappeared or acted unpredictably between world ages. So it's not necessarily saying the earth spun backwards. In the Bible, Isaiah 38:8, there's a moment where God makes the shadow on the sundial go backwards 10 steps as a sign to King Hezekiah. And Emmanuel Velikovsky, in this controversial book, Worlds in Collision, in 1950, Velikovsky argued that planetary bodies like Venus came close enough to Earth to alter its rotation and even cause its temporary spin in reverse. So, but in that one, it says mainstream scientists roasted him alive. But even today, some alternative historians say that it's just he was correct. He was just a little too early for other people to admit that possibly he was correct. So there was something to think about there.
It was Plato, you said, that said it happened 4 times. The Egyptian in Egyptian history.
Yeah, so Plato said that he said the reverse of the sun and setting sun, cosmic catastrophe. He describes the world being shaken like a garment with the sun changing, which he ties to. It doesn't say 4 times, but in the Mayans, yes. And the Egyptian priest told Herodotus that it happened 4 times.
Okay, the Mayan, yeah.
Yeah, and
there's
the
another mention
Aztecs
of
and the
4.
Mayans. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yes, the Egyptians. Yes, the Egyptian priest telling him that the sun had risen in the west and set in the east 4 times in Egypt's distant past. So there we go. 4 different issues with the sun as well. So now we're at 5. We're at 5 now.
And the more I think about it, a volcanic trigger event makes sense because, as we know, there were floods, correct? What cools down volcanism? If the earth deviated, floods came, cooled the spot, and then eventually it erupted again, as Plato said, recurring after long intervals. And then we go through the deviation process again. Earth spreads the weight. We have a peace, which is what the Yuga cycles are all about. They're all about the time of peace between these events. And actually here, you'll find some very interesting dates if you divide all of the Yuga cycle start dates by 360. The number of days many ancient cultures used in their calendars.
What is that magic number that we end up getting with? Sorry.
Well, there's several. You have 4 Yuga cycles, so you would have 4 dates.
Sorry.
One of them, I believe,
I understand what you're saying. Yes. So there's 4
one of them, I
specific
believe,
dates.
is 2808 BCE, which is very, very, very close to the current estimated date of Noah's flood, the biblical flood. It's, I think, within 300 years of each other. The first Yuga cycle comes out to 10,808 BCE, which is right around the time of the end of the Younger Dryas and the destruction of Athens and Atlantis, according to Plato.
And when we're talking about cataclysms as well, there is also the story of Atlantis, that allegedly, it went down in a cataclysmic type of event, one of those possibly being a large volcano as well, which the location of Atlantis, of course, is always up for debate. But a lot of people, including my friend Michael Laflamme, believe it's closer to beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, also known as the Pillars of Hercules. So it would be a little more northern. It's in the northern hemisphere. Maybe something like that helped to realign the Earth as well. Like to change it back a little bit. I don't know. Is that a possibility? Have you considered that?
When it comes to Atlantis, what I do know is there is an amazing set of marks across southern Spain. It actually, and they're S-shaped, which is exactly what we would expect to see from an object in motion residing on a sphere undergoing a wobble. S-shape is you have a high peak and a low peak. They appear to come right out of the Atlantic, and they come across the southern half of Spain, and it looks like it slid sideways and stopped, and then was thrown back out into the Atlantic. And I think that's when the Azores broke off of the mass that it was attached to. I did a long time ago when I first started this, I did an overlay, and the Azores Plateau is amazingly similar to the Bay of Biscay, just north of Spain. It fits like a glove. I don't think our planet right now looks anything like it did 15,000 years ago at all.
I agree completely.
I know that the moving of land masses is a very wild theory. But as I was talking about, the rotational speed would increase. What increases with rotational speed is torque. And I believe at the point of the flip, enough torque was created that land masses could shift. Because if we really think about how volcanism works, when you have an eruption, what does that lava pour out onto? Dirt, loose rocks. In the case of oceans, it's sediment. Under the right circumstances, that's a potential slip layer. That sediment and that loose rock with enough force is a slip layer. So when the Earth
That
spun
makes
over
sense.
and redistributed the weight, that's how it had to do it. There's literally no other way it could have been done.
Yeah, it's a centrifugal force that's pushing them kind of out and away. And okay, I understand. Understand what you're saying here. So, and like this landmass is moving is something that we've been told for many years. It's like Pangea. We had the one big continent, Pangea, and then everything kind of drifted apart, is what we were told. But I believe that I'm not sure if I buy into that anymore. I'm buying more into, well, maybe there was less water. More of it was actually in a frozen state, and there was less water, and we had more land, and we had more land bridges, because that then would constitute, because they're saying, well, how does this fauna or how does these creatures exist in both of these areas at the same time, unless they were joined, unless they were touching each other, and then they drifted apart. But what happens if they were
Right.
apart and then there's that land bridge, because there's not as much water at this time? And then you're talking about the centrifugal force of shifting these, or this change, this tilt, this wobble is changing, is causing some of these extremely large land masses to move away, to fall away. It's really interesting that it could be. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot more sense than this continental drift.
I've this part of it that we're getting into here is what I've spent the bulk of my 5 years actually looking into. I've looked at so many miles of bathymetry data. I want to scream and run out of the room sometimes. I'm so tired of it, but I fully believe in what I'm seeing. And what I'm seeing is that there is a lot of evidence that the ocean ridges were actually carved out by one of the land masses being redistributed weight wise. I've found to date 4 different patterns. And they all have elements of rotation to them.
Like, when you're saying rotation, so they're going like this, like they're shifting in a rotated type matter, like these.
You can literally see it in the striations on the ocean floor. You can see the rotation as it happens everywhere around. The ocean ridges are literally the book on what landmass moved where. This is kind of hard to get into without putting a bunch of screenshots up.
That's all right. We can put the screenshots up if you want, or I can put them up after too, if you want to. If we want to take 2 seconds here, and if you want to pull them up, you can share them.
Well, we might have to save that for another day because there's a lot of things to cover. I mean, like I've got an alternative explanation for magnetic striping. I've got an alternative explanation for the age gradient on the ocean ridges, which is they say newer rock is closer and older rock is further away. And this supports their theory that of tectonics, that new plate is being built there and pushed off to the side. The only problem with that is anybody who's ever plowed in their life knows that's the same thing that happens every time you drop a plow in dirt. You get an age gradient. You're pulling up newer rock and you're throwing it out on the surface, and the older rock at the top gets pushed off to the side.
You're right.
So a shifting landmass could very well make, I should say, those marks.
And so I want to go back a little bit to, because I know we haven't talked about it, but you talked about like instantaneous freezing almost of sorts. I'd like to dive a little bit into that.
Well, I mean, we know a lot of people have heard that we've found buried in permafrost, animals that literally have undigested food in their stomach still. How do you get frozen that quickly?
I was just reading about that. I think it was a woolly mammoth that they just recovered 2 weeks ago, a week ago, that it has this undigested food, and they're like, we don't know how it died, kind of thing. Or there was a cave bear that they found, and we're like, we don't know how it died, and it still had undigested food in its stomach, which seems to happen a lot with these much larger, like the megafauna type of creatures.
I think that was a case of after the flip, when the Earth stopped flipping, obviously still rotating, but had flipped over, that flip placed certain land masses at the polar regions. And that is how they were frozen so quickly. I can't think of another way, no matter how hard I rack my brain, to explain that. But a deviation might. Not saying it does, but it surely could.
So either like
and I'm not a fan of coincidences.
So what you had said before as well, like it could have been like a strike that pierced the earth and caused this lake of magma to form, or hell, pretty much is what you're saying, to have hell, the creation of
Yes.
hell. Um, and that would have been like instantaneous, and it wouldn't have been like a slow a slow change. It was almost instant that this changed, or I wouldn't say instant, but pretty quick. It would have changed the inclination of the Earth and causing this almost insta freeze. You know, like going from maybe -10, because some of these creatures, of course, woolly mammoths and whatnot, were already in the cold, but it's just this instantaneous shock. It reminds me of that movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie 2012, when they talked about like they had all like these cataclysmic events, and then there was like this beam of ice freezing cold that was streaming from the heavens, and it was like instantly freezing stuff. I wonder if it was anything along that line, like how quick that acted.
Unfortunately, we don't have many indicators of a timeline. We have an estimation of how long it took Noah to build the ark before the flood came.
True.
How far the earth was inclined by the time Enoch wrote that passage, we don't know. So, unfortunately, narrowing down time frames is very difficult for us.
True. It is, but we do know that it could have been instant. From these creatures dying with undigested food still in their bellies, and no real signs of death, like, and how they died. They just froze to death, I think is what they said. Then
Yeah,
it almost sounds like it could have been instantaneous on how this happened.
I would imagine the flip was probably the quickest part of it. You'd have the
Mhm.
rotational speed build up and the wobble going, and I would think that that would be the instance that flip placed where that animal resided in a polar region, which I mean, step outside in Antarctica without any clothes and see how fast you freeze.
True, exactly. I No, thank you, no, thank you. Now, so this,
According,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, according to the Hindu, the Yuga cycles, they have the dusk and the dawn. They're periods of 400 years. That's
Okay,
about the only actual indicator we have of a time frame.
okay. I do have one question as well. So in general, this is what we call like this is what you call like the reversal of the poles. Like this is the pole flip, right? So this is what that is.
I'm not sure it was if the poles didn't take. It depends on whether you're talking magnetic, because if you're talking atmospheric, those poles stay in place. That's all our angle to the sun. You know, we have
Okay.
our tropical zone and our polars. So I can't honestly say how the Earth flipped over and which way it stopped.
Hmm.
So that's kind of hard to tell.
It is. It is. And I know maybe you are not into this, but perhaps I know there's other people, and I'm always open to hearing everybody's description, but perhaps a flat Earth inclination can also be explained in this type of scenario as well. That's something that might possibly be there as well. You know, it could be spinning. I don't know, but I'd love to hear someone else, like a flat earther, go have a go at this as well. See what they come up with, because I think too many people just like, oh, you're a flat earther, I don't want to hear from you, and they throw them out. You know, but it's like, I think we need just to come together and all have a good conversation. But I'm not saying I'm one way or the other. I'm just open to hearing everybody's side.
I don't dismiss anything. I need evidence to support something, but I don't
Yes.
dismiss anything. It's, to me, that's one of our biggest problems. I think we're a little too arrogant sometimes as a species, and we just think we know so much and we just pass information by that 20, 30 years later we find out was absolutely relevant in the first place.
I that is one of the biggest issues. Yeah, and we're narcissistic, egotistical when it comes to this all, and it's just like, no, I learned it this way. This is the way it is, until we learn something new. And even sometimes when we learn something new, people still hold on to the old ways and they don't want to let it go. They don't want to change what they've been taught, because they're like, if I say that this is incorrect, then everything I've learned is incorrect. But that is how we grow as a species. We have to be able to say, yeah, let's hear it. Let's see what's going to happen. Is there something that's going to change the whole narrative, of us as a species? We should always be open to that instead of just throwing it away.
Yeah, and we need to revisit things every time technology advances. We learn new things that we didn't know 30 years ago.
Yeah,
Are you familiar with Mu?
I've heard of Moo before, but I am not. Can you tell me a little bit about Moo? I've heard, like I said, I've heard of it before. I've heard of some other places, like of course Atlantis, Lemuria, but I've heard of Moo. But that's as far as it goes.
Mu was a landmass proposed by a man named James Churchward. He started writing a book in 1924 called Mu, the Motherland of Man. Um, it had similarities to Plato's Atlantis. He was teamed up with an ancient priest. It was an island out in the middle of somewhere. It sunk by volcanic activity. There were a lot of similarities, and because of that, and obviously because he couldn't really produce any evidence, he didn't have the tablets. He was kind of laughed off the scene, and but in my research, as I was following the ocean ridges around to the Pacific, I found something very interesting. In James Churchward's book, he says that Mu was a land that housed 64 million inhabitants, known as the Nakals, and that this land was broken into three sections, separated by narrow waterways and seas. Now, he also described this landmass as sitting from north of Hawaii to the south as far as Easter Island, which is a very, very, very large landmass. Turns out there's a magnetic anomaly exactly that size in the Pacific that stretches from north of Hawaii all the way to the south as far as Easter Island. And you may have heard Graham Hancock. He talks a lot about how the Polynesians and the DNA between the Polynesians and the Easter Island people, there's your connection. Mu. Mu is your connection to those people. That's the DNA connection. You don't get that lucky. You don't just say, hey, yeah, there used to be a landmass from this point to that point, and then today there's a magnetic anomaly from that point to that point. Especially in 1924, he had zero tech to help him make that call at all.
Interesting. That is fascinating. And so, what can you tell me a little bit more about Moo? Like, when did it allegedly disappear? When was this proposed, and when did it disappear? Is that disappeared because of one of these cataclysms? I'm assuming so, but I don't know.
I haven't fully finished his book yet. Um, like I said, I've been focusing on. Lately. I've been trying to gather a lot of screenshots and data of the ocean ridges, of faults and things and everything. Mu is Mu is a very long, interesting conversation because the Hawaiian Islands. Many people I don't think, have even looked at it. The Hawaiian Islands actually are exactly the same shape wise from Northern California all the way down through the tip of Baja. You can take the USA and put it right up against the Hawaiian Islands, and it's almost a dead match. And I think that Mu actually was the first continent during the first cataclysm that broke up. I think that might have actually been where one of the impacts happened, and I think we have stories of it. We just don't know We can't pin down where they're from. If you divide Mu by the Hawaiian island chain, if you just take a line and make a rough swath through there, you get two shapes that develop. You get the western half of the U.S. and the Yucatan Peninsula, and you get South America. Now, if you look at the ocean floor between the Hawaiian Islands and the west coast of the U.S., there's a bunch of lines going from point A to point B. Now, these are called faults, and it's a big, long topic of discussion to get into why I believe that they're wrong. But there's indicators on these lines that indicate movement from west to east. So you have a magnetic anomaly that, when broken up, shows two land masses, and then you have a bunch of lines from where that anomaly is to where land masses sit today, and you have indicators in those lines that indicate movement from west to east. Again, three coincidences. I'm not a fan. I don't like coincidences.
There's a reason. There is always a reason. Wow. Okay.
I believe
And Mhm.
I can throw this up here real quick. Do I hit the present button?
You bet. Yeah, hit the present button.
As you can see, it's a lighter colored area. There's a lot of dark blue in the ocean, but the anomaly is lighter colored, and you can see it stretches right up over North Hawaii and all the way down to Easter Island.
Oh, okay. And so that those lines, those lighter colors that are kind of coming down, that was where Mu was supposedly supposed to be. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly where James Churchward in 1924 said Mu sat, and exactly the size that he said it was.
That's interesting. That's huge. That's about the size of North America, if not even a little bit bigger. It's
And
it's big.
that's an I love my overlays. I actually took this. Let me show you the second one here. This one is outline that we're going to bring up next.
So for all those who are listening, check out the YouTube and you can see these pictures here coming up. It's so Mu allegedly, in my opinion, looks about the size of North America. And now he's going to have some outlines where he's going to. Oh, hang on. I think I actually have to switch that presentation. That's me. There we go. You were waiting on me. I didn't know that I had to, I had to do that. All right. There we go. Okay. So, okay, that's bigger than North America.
And you can see by using the Hawaiian island chain as a rough dividing line, that's all I did. And those shapes popped out. Now, the red circle here, that's obviously around Hawaii, which we know is a volcanic hotspot, correct? If you look at South America today, right around, and let's say that this anomaly is South America, okay? If you look at South America today, within where that red circle would be is a major cluster of supervolcanoes. I've actually I've tinkered with the idea that if I'm correct and land masses have shifted, and you have to think, if the western half of the U.S. and Yucatan Peninsula in South America were located where this anomaly is, then you literally could have left the Pillars of Heracles and sailed straight to Mu, because nothing would have been in your way. The interesting
Yes.
part of that is, do you know the name that the Aztec claimed their homeland is?
Isn't it Adel or something like that, or along that line?
Aztlan, Aztlan.
There we go. There
Now,
we go.
that could have very easily been a base word for translation to Atlantis.
Yes, I agree.
Now, another interesting thing is, if I'm correct, and that is the western half of the U.S., you would have Yellowstone within that landmass right there, which would be your hot springs. And I just thought of this the other day, and I could be way
Sorry.
off base on
I
this, but
think
it
I'm
was
getting confused. Sorry, Scott. I think I'm getting confused. So what you're saying is Mu is actually North America?
the western half, yes. The western half, Yucatan Peninsula, and South America. The eastern part of the U.S. would have been the diverse islands that you would have come to when you left the Pillars of Heracles before arriving at Atlantis.
Okay. Okay. I understand now. I was getting
That's
confused
my
as well.
thought.
Like, okay. That is really intriguing. I like it. I like it. So, yeah, if you're listening, everyone, you got to check out the video so you can see these. I'll make sure. Maybe I'll try to see if I can put them into the show notes on the audio as well, so you can actually check that out. But really interesting. This is fascinating stuff. Now, is there anything else
We
we
may
want to cover
even,
here? Hmm.
the Devil's Tower could have been our flat top mountain of God that's been described to us.
Really?
Because that
Okay.
also would have been on the Mu Peninsula with the western half of the U.S. there. Because the Devil's Tower and Yellowstone are relatively close together.
So, tell me about this. Sorry. Tell me a little bit about this, the Devil's Tower, and your theory of it.
And there's really no theory to it other than it popped into my head as I was pondering um, where Yellowstone would have been if it actually was there. Would it have been part of that landmass or not? And then I was by Yellowstone and I went, oh, Devil's Tower, flat top mountain of God. Just one of those rabbit holes your
Okay.
brain dives down in the last minute.
Yes, of course. When you're going down these, things start to, but things start to line up a little bit, and they make a lot more sense when they start to line up. And when you start, maybe following the proper bread trail crumbs, you start to piece things together a little bit better.
Yeah. When it, showing the screenshots of the ocean ridges and going over that data it's actually really interesting because there's a lot of things that just stand out to you that go, this isn't right.
D- Yes, yes. There's something just not right. I agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that.
If you look at, you have the center line of the ocean ridge and then you have your perpendicular lines that come off of it, and geology basically explains those as stress cracks. But if you notice, they hold the same geological shape. I mean, geometric, excuse me. They turn they arc in the same place, they arc down in the same place, they go straight in the same place, and this is thousands of miles apart. Rock does not break like that. You cannot have a stress fracture in rock 1,000 miles away from another stress fracture and they're going to look exactly the same. That just doesn't happen. In order to have that happen, you would have to have a single mass in motion. That mass is the same motion. So it will make the same marks, but you're not going to have breaks in rock that look exactly the same.
I see what you're saying because it's as it moves along, it's creating the exact same breaks or those stresses.
Exactly. Well, you've got a large land mass as it is. So as it goes, it's going to create 3 or 4 of those at a time. And the interesting thing is the other side of the ocean ridge does exactly the opposite. Where this one turns up, this one over here turns down. Where this one arcs this way, this one arcs this way. They're actually mirrors of each other, just reversed. And if you put it together from one side to the other, you have a big S, which we talked about earlier as an indicator of a wobble.
Yes, that's exactly what you said. Yeah, that was by Spain, right? By Spain.
Yeah, it's
You had
actually
mentioned that.
the
Okay.
entire southern half of Spain. There's a gouge 4,200 foot deep right through a mountain range that is spectacular to look at. Actually, there's no glacier that did that.
Yeah, a lot of these glacier talks, I'm like, I'm not 100% sure. I know ice is quite powerful, but I'm not 100% sure if everything is a glacier. And this is of Spain, correct? That we're going to be presenting? Okay, here we go. All right, here we are. Oh, so you're saying this big line in here, is this what you're saying in this way?
Yes, if you look at the dotted line just a little bit to the right of that black square, you can actually see where something, whatever made that gouge through the mountain, just was clipping the higher elevations. You can see little right above the dotted line. You can see the little spots where it's just clipping the tops of mountains.
Okay. Yes, all through this way.
Yeah, and I believe that
Right
was
through
made
here
on
as
the
well.
exit. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can definitely see from here. And I know people are going to say, "Oh, it's just a river," but how does a river cut through a mountain? Like, how does it go
And
up and
only
over
the
the
mountain.
mountain to eventually cut it down to size? It's not going to go up and over, so it can't
Yeah.
go up and over a mountain. It's okay. And then up in the red area, what was up in this one here? Is there anything we want to?
Actually, if you look just to the left, or I'm sorry, just to the right of that black box on our first gouge through the mountains there, you can see where the line starts and
Oh
actually
yeah,
curves to it just
or this
outside the
one? Do you
box
mean
there
this
on
one
the
here?
right. Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, yeah, it's a massive cut that way, right?
Yep. And you can see it progresses and you can see how the S shape is developing.
Okay, yes, yeah, kind of up this way to the left, and then it kind
The
of circles.
the red box indicates where I believe the landmass kind of spun as it stopped before it. You can. There's another angle that you'll see here in a second that really makes that stand out.
All right, let's go to. Is it this one here or
That
no?
one right there. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, yeah, we can definitely see. So this is the black box, the one that you originally showed us. Oh, okay, I see. This is where
Correct.
it started. This is where you're saying it started from. There's a little bit of that S mark, and it comes down
I
and
think
flips.
something came out of the Atlantic and slid up onto Spain, rotated and stopped, and then slid back out into the Atlantic more towards the south.
That's quite the cataclysmic event that you're talking about.
Well, if land masses have shifted, then, it's water and land. The red box, you can see clearly where it looks like something spun out right there. The marks absolutely indicate that. You
Definitely,
have a
how it comes
you
in
have
and
a
goes.
debris field at the end of it where the mark stops.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, because it's coming in like this. This is what you're saying. It's spinning in this way.
Yes.
Okay, coming in from the left and spinning over to the right and up.
And you can tell looking if you study those lines, you can see they're all connected. It forms the perfect S and then spins out. And then you can see the line that runs kind of to the left, almost right out of the center of the circle or the red box that comes down. That's the exit line. After it's spun in there and stopped, it came out that way. And that's when I believe the Azores Plateau was disconnected from it.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm understanding. So there was possibly something sitting on top of this, and it spun up over into this right side, came back down, and then off to the left again.
Well, the big question is was it Atlantis that made those marks?
Great question. Great question.
You have marks that indicate forensically, at least, I'm pretty sure if a forensic officer looked at that, they would say that those marks indicate that they are starting in the west towards the Atlantic and come on to Spain. Now, if Plato says Atlantis was sitting right out there, then there is the possibility that it was Atlantis that made those marks and that Atlantis did not sink, it simply moved.
It just moved. Wow. And there's the three. That's it. I think that's a very interesting theory, Scott. Very interesting. And we can clear as day see it. Something moved up. It kind of spun out what you said, which kind of like spun up. Think of, for those who are just listening, think of a truck that spins out in some mud and then kind of comes back down in another way. Maybe it's going up a hill, trying to go up a hill, slides to the side, and then comes back down and back almost the same way it came in, but a little bit lower is what is happening in that that we can see in these striations and these rocks, that it's showing us.
Any kid who's ever ridden a bike know what that looks like when you lock up your brakes and you turn your bike to the side. That's exactly what that mark looks like.
That's exactly, yeah. I was talking more of a truck, but yes, if you're thinking of a kid, yeah, it's like your bike and you lock it all up and you skid your bike to the side. Back in the day when we had the BMX bikes, that was all the rage to do that.
So I mean, now you take the story, and we've talked about Mu and how that may have broken up, and now you have Plato saying that Atlantis was right out there in the Atlantic, and now you have this extraordinary set of marks across southern Spain that indicates that something came out of the Atlantic. How many things are we going to ignore before we get our heads out of it?
We have too many stories of people telling us that there's these cataclysmic events, things are shifting, things are moving, but we just mainstream science just has its blinders on and doesn't want to pay attention.
Well, there's an excellent passage in Revelation that says the heavens receded like a scroll, and every mountain and island was moved from its place.
What more can you say? That's a great, that sums it all up right there. Exactly what you've been saying. That is that's exactly in the Bible what it's saying as well. Well, Scott, I know we're getting closer to our my time limit and whatnot. Is there anything else we want to discuss before we wrap this one up today?
I think we pretty much covered everything we can cover for the night.
Perfect. So Scott, I want to definitely thank you for reaching out to me and coming on and I would say giving us a true history lesson and a geology lesson and I don't know, a little bit of everything. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Scott, and stick around there. All right, everyone. That was Scott Randal who came in, delivered, and I hope he blew some minds here. It's not just a theory. It's not a theory when you are bringing in all this information and putting it all together because it's there for us. That's the thing is all this information is there for us, but no one is piecing it together. Why not? Why are we not piecing these things together? I don't know. It's well, I know a lot of reasons is because they want to keep this information from us, but why? What is the key? Maybe revelation did already happen. Did rapture already happen? I actually had a theory. I believe that revelation already happened as well. That's why I was interested to hear what he had to say. So this is really interesting, and I think Scott's going to be coming back again to give us a part 2. I really do hope so. If you guys have any questions, please by all means put them in the comments, and any questions for Scott himself, put them in the comments, and we can answer them next time around, or I can reach out to him and he can answer them and I can give you an answer back. And with that, everyone, I want to say thanks for showing up. And if you're tired of the ads as well, just one little last plug. go check out my Patreon for just over a coffee a month. You can actually have this all ad-free. Why not? Instead of buying a coffee, help support an independent creator, and independent news creator, because that's kind of what this is. This is news. Maybe not new news, but we're bringing this all together for you, bringing you the truth. And, well, that's what we do. And with that, everyone, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Giants, cryptids that call,